I used to think that you had to get that financial freedom, that money freedom first before all of the others fell into place. And what I've realized is that that's actually backwards. This episode of the Unstoppable CEO podcast is sponsored by our referable book program, where we'll create a great lead generating book for you. If you've always wanted to write a book for your business but never managed to get it done, let us do it for you. To find out if this is a fit for you, schedule a quick 20-minute intro call with me at unstoppableceo.net. Click the Book a Call button. Now on to the episode. Welcome to the Unstoppable CEO podcast. I'm your host, Steve Gordon, and today we got a special episode. I'm solo on the podcast today, and I'm going to talk about something that I've been working on since the beginning of the year. And, we came through a lot in 2020. And, I think for a lot of us, we had some soul searching to do. Like, what are we really building? I know I did. And I took, I took advantage of the time that we had in the spring of 2020, during kind of the big lockdown, and, spent a lot of time outside in nature and did a lot of thinking. And then as we got towards the end of the year, kind of repeated that process again and got really clear on what I wanted to build as a business. And that turned into a little bit of a mantra for me. And I'm going to share that with you today. And I think it'll be of interest. And then I'm going to talk a little bit today about how I started the implementation of kind of building this next version of the business. And then I think in the following episodes, we'll probably turn this into a series of 3 or 4 episodes. We'll talk about some specifics of the implementation, particularly the areas where I think they're most challenging, have been most challenging for me and are most challenging for many business owners. So that's the plan today. And so really what I came to out of all of this reflection over the last year, and really thinking deeply about the business that I wanted to build, it really boiled down into one statement. In fact, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll show you a little sticky note that I have on my monitor. Hopefully you can read that. It says, "The less I do, the more I make." And that has kind of become my mantra. In fact, I've got it on this sticky note so that I look at it every day. And when I came up with that, actually it was kind of in early January, I'd hit this almost like a breaking point. We'd been really busy at the end of the year and, really almost a little overwhelmed. And I'd been working 7 days a week for several weeks. And I know from times in my career when I've had to do that before that there's a limit to how long you can do that. And I had hit that limit. And so it was a Wednesday morning. I couldn't take it anymore. I was stressed out and needed to make some changes and make them right away. And so I sat down with my journal and I started writing what I really wanted in terms of how I wanted the business to operate, the kind of life that I wanted to live. I wrote out some rules for how I would deal with my time beginning that day. And I'd gotten into some bad habits with the way that I was managing my time, and probably gotten into some bad habits with the way I was consuming content and media. And, I spent about an hour just writing, and I had about 4 or 5 pages at the end of that hour of what I wanted and how I wanted my days to operate. And for the first time in probably a year, I'd really had a degree of clarity that I hadn't had all through 2020, because I think 2020 for a lot of us was just trying to find our footing and figure out where we were going to go from there, given all of the changes that had happened. And so I got this clarity, and it was amazing. And out of that came, again, these rules for how I was going to deal with my time. Maybe I'll publish some of those on the website, but I don't know that those rules are necessarily what would help you though, because they were the right rules for me. Really what it did though, the exercise of going through that allowed me to get my mindset right. It allowed me to get clear and then say, okay, well, if this is what I really want, am I going to allow that to be something that is off in the future for me, like I've done in the past, and maybe you've done, where you say, yeah, I really want to get to this point where I'm not working so hard, when I've got, some time freedom, when I can do the things that I want to do, when I want to do them. And I think I've been guilty of saying, well, that's off in the future after I hit the next goal. And then it always seems to be, the goalpost keeps moving, right? It always seems to be off a little bit further when you get to that goal. And I just had this kind of insight as I was going through all of this, that the only way to have that is to create it. You have to be what you want. And so in this kind of moment of clarity, I said, all right, well, we're going to rearrange things now. And, I couldn't get to my ultimate goal. So my ultimate goal is to be working a 4-day week, taking every Friday off, playing golf on Fridays, because I enjoy doing that. Haven't done enough of that lately. And I'm going to start doing more of that. And, and I was working 7 days a week. So the weekends are now, no work zones. And so I was immediately able to say, okay, well, I'm going to go from 7 days a week to 6 days a week effective now. And so this was on a Wednesday. That following Saturday, I didn't work. Got things in order over the week after that to where that next weekend was 100% off. And then said, all right, well, if the goal is to be taking, every Friday off, I've got these 4-day weekends. 4-day weeks where time is going to be compressed. Well, the best way to get there is just to do it. And so I set a deadline and I said, all right, beginning of the third quarter, so July 1st, I'm working 4-day weeks no matter what. And so I immediately went in and blocked the calendar. And the reason I'm describing all of this to you, because, as I've described it, it all sounds so simple. And it is really simple. The actions are simple, but I don't think they're easy to do, because I think for a lot of us, we feel like we've got to put the grind in. And, I talk a lot about Dan Sullivan and Strategic Coach on here. And Dan Sullivan said something in a podcast interview that I heard. And I don't remember which podcast it was, but this has stuck with me. And I heard this last year, and he said, the entrepreneur that's overscheduled cannot transform themselves. And one of the insights I had as I was doing this journaling that Wednesday was that the only way that I'm going to, create all of the freedoms that I want. And you've probably heard John Curry and I in some of the episodes we've done together talk about the 5 freedoms, financial freedom, time freedom, relationship freedom, freedom of purpose. And John always likes to add freedom of location. The only way to get those, the path, I guess the better way to say it is the path to getting those, is not what everybody thinks that it is. And it's not what I thought it was for a while. So I used to think that you had to get that financial freedom, that money freedom first before all of the others fell into place. And what I've realized is that that's actually backwards. That the first thing you have to get in place is time freedom. You have to free up your time so that you can create the innovations. You can use your own creativity to innovate, make things happen in those other areas to create the financial freedom and to have the relationships that you need to have to get to that next level. And so that was kind of the insight. And so I said, all right, well, I need to start now creating time freedom immediately. So as I went through that process, I said, all right, well, I'm not going to get to, life is still happening, business is still happening, and I'm not going to be able to do this overnight, but I can take concrete steps towards doing it. And I said, all right, well, I'm pretty heavily booked for like the next 3 weeks, but 4 weeks out from this Wednesday in January, I could see the schedule was starting to free up a little bit. And so I went and I had a couple of things on the calendar. The Friday of that week, I got those rescheduled and I blocked that day. And I had my first 4-day week just a month after I'd gone through this whole process. And so what I want you to take from this is that it's really kind of a 3-step process to get there. If this is something that you're aspiring to, and the first step is make the decision. Hey, this is what I want, and be clear about it. The second thing is then you got to take action on it. And the very first action to take is to create a constraint, to go ahead and free up the time and create a constraint in your schedule, because then everything else starts to mold itself around that constraint. And that's exactly what I've experienced. So I took that Friday off. That first Friday was in February. It was the strangest day that I've taken off in a long time, because again, I'd been putting in a lot of time, a lot of hours, maybe you can relate. and, just feeling like 2020 just needed to keep grinding and grinding and grinding to push things forward. So I took that day off. I created that little bit of freedom, and it was odd because I didn't know what to do with myself. I was scheduled to play golf that day. I thought, this is going to be my first day. It's going to be amazing. And of course it rained and it was cold. And, and not only had it rained that day, because I probably would have played in the rain, but it had rained like monsoon rains here in Florida for about 4 days before that. So the course was underwater. So I really didn't have a big schedule that day, but I did some reading, some non-business reading, and just kind of sat outside on the back porch and watched it rain for a bit and just decompressed. The clarity that came out of that, the ideas that by the time I got to the third day of that 3-day weekend, that were just flooding into my head that hadn't been there before. The creativity that was sparked by that was really just phenomenal. So that was great. I took that momentum. I blocked another Friday. So 2 Fridays off, 2 4-day weeks inside of February, and then blocked another 2 off in March. In fact, the end of the week that I'm recording this, I've got another one. I'm really looking forward to it too, because I think the weather's going to be finally good. But I created those constraints. And because of that, all of a sudden, everything started to form itself around this shortened week. So I didn't, for the weeks where I was just working the 4 days, everything got done. It's not like there was a lot hanging over. There wasn't. Everything got done. And not only that, I started to see the path to getting every week to be like that. And before I'd done that, I didn't fully clearly see the path. The other thing I did is I shared it with my team. So we've got a small team. We're not, not a huge team, but we've got a small team. And I shared it with our key people, and they were actually really supportive of me taking the time off. And I kind of felt guilty about doing that because they're working during that time. My goal is to get to the point where, the whole company is set up so that everybody can have this kind of a schedule if they want it. Getting to those stages, it's always a process, but you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to say, all right, it's not going to happen in the future. It's going to happen now. And so for this episode, that's really what I want to get across to you, is that whether it's this kind of a change or some other change in your business, you've got to make the decision to get there and then decide, well, what's the space I need to create to make that happen? And then go create the space immediately. Figure out how you can start carving out the space. I think it's in personal development, there's this old 3-part saying, be, do, have. You've got to be what you want, and then you've got to do what you want, and then you'll have what you want. It seems kind of rudimentary, but, and I think in a lot of ways it's true that if we can get out of this mode of thinking, if only in the future I get to that point, get out of the mode of thinking, well, that's down the road for me, because it doesn't have to be. The fact that it's down the road for you is just a story that you're telling yourself. Just as easy to tell yourself a different story that, no, this is going to be now. And here are the steps that I'm going to take and when I'm going to take them, starting today, to begin to put this into practice. And so that's what I want to leave you with, is this sort of 3-part approach that I think really is the mindset of this. It's make the decision, get clarity and make the decision about what you want, then take some immediate action. I'm not all the way to where I want to be yet, but I took the immediate action I could take. And then I started extending that so that by the time I get to this deadline of July 1st, when my schedule is going to change, and now I'm going to only work 4 days a week, I'm going to have 3 days every week free. I put the things in place to work my way there. But if I hadn't put that hard date on the calendar, it never would have happened. And I also think if all I had done was put that hard date on the calendar and I hadn't started taking steps along the way to kind of build up that capability, wouldn't have happened either. So make the decision, take some immediate action, extend that action. And the easiest way to make these things happen is to create constraints. And if you can create a constraint that will force you to be creative and force you to find a solution that will get you to what you want, the whole thing will become easier. So like I said, we're going to do a series on this topic, all around the idea of the less I do, the more I make. I'm going to talk about how this has impacted our marketing, how it has impacted internally the team and how we're building out the company now to support this and really build the business that I always knew I wanted. I just wasn't clear about from the get-go. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. I hope it's inspiring to you. And please send me a note, leave me a comment if this resonates with you. If you have specific questions about how to apply it in your business, send me that as well. We'll talk about those in future episodes in this series. And I don't know how many episodes we'll do in the series, probably at least 3, maybe a few more than that. But if you've got questions or things you want me to cover, we'll just keep going with it until we've got all that covered. But anyway, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Unstoppable CEO podcast. Help others discover this show. Leave a review and rating on iTunes at unstoppableceo.net/iTunes.